This happened to me a couple of years ago. At the time, my fiance didn't even believe me, but I'd been convinced for several weeks that someone was watching our home. Several Amazon packages had been stolen. We'd find cigarette butts by the front door when neither of us smoke, and the doormat had been moved as well. We had just moved to the area recently, and I was feeling really uneasy about all of this. My fiance teased me for watching too many murder mysteries and crime shows, and eventually I dropped the subject altogether. One night, we were in bed together, nearly asleep, when our cat started being really loud. My fiance got up to feed her when he realized we forgot to get cat food when we were out earlier. We both felt a little guilty about going to sleep knowing she was hungry, so he told me not to worry. He would run over to the little 24-hour convenience store that was about 5 minutes down the street. He got dressed to leave, and I rolled over to go back to bed. I'm lying on my side in bed facing our window, and right as my fiancé goes to leave, I can see his shadow on the blinds as he walks down the sidewalk. I didn't know it yet, but apparently he forgot to lock the door. Maybe a minute or two after he left, I saw a shadow pass by the bedroom window again and heard footsteps coming back up the sidewalk. I figured since he was tired, he'd probably forgotten his wallet or something and had to come back. This wouldn't be the first time such a thing had happened. I chuckled to myself at how forgetful he is, and the front door opened. My cat jumped off the bed to go and greet him. What happened next took place over the span of maybe 3 minutes or so, but it felt like 3 days in the moment. It was dark and dead quiet in our house. Quiet enough I could hear my cat's little steps on the bedroom carpet suddenly stopping. She then let out the deepest and most terrifying growl I'd ever heard a cat make. At this point, I heard whoever this was take a few steps into our living room, shush her, and then sneeze. It was definitely not my fiance's voice. There I was, a woman alone at night and naked in bed, scared out of my mind with no idea what to do. This guy clearly knew my fiance was out. Did he know I was home alone? Was he there to kidnap or hurt me? My phone had died earlier, of course, so now it was off and plugged into the charger. I knew that once I turned it on, AT&T's loud as fuck little jingle was going to betray me, so for right now I was on my own. Thankfully, we keep a shotgun by our bedside. I slipped out of bed, grabbed the gun, and crawled as quietly as I could toward the bedroom door, which was 2/3 of the way closed. I could hear this creep rummaging through our stuff in the living room. He was sneezing over and over. The nerve of this prick. I peeked through the gap in the door, and the outside light was just barely bright enough to illuminate a man hunched over our entertainment center, his back towards me. I silently opened the door the rest of the way and stood still 100% naked and 100% determined to keep myself and my cat safe. I muttered all my stupidity and courage and cocked my gun. In the deepest booming voice my body would allow me to make, I bellowed out, "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" I've never seen a human jump so hard or run so fast. I scared the creep so badly it looked like he was about to launch himself into orbit. I got one good look at his back as he ran outside into the darkness. Then he was gone. I slammed the door shut behind him and yanked my terrified cat out from underneath the couch by their neck. We booked it back to the bedroom with my gun still in hand. I held her close to my chest and started sobbing while I struggled to turn my phone on and dial 911. My fiance got home with a can of cat food moments later and immediately noticed the PS4 on the ground and our other electronics moved around. He found me in the bedroom flipping out. I barely got any words out to explain what happened before the cops showed up too. They were super nice, but unfortunately there was not much they could do. They didn't exactly have a lot to go on, since neither of us had seen the man's face at all, and therefore we couldn't give them a description really. Fortunately, none of our stuff actually ended up being taken, and more importantly, my cat and I were both okay. We were positive, though, that the creep must have lived in our area, as a few weeks later, someone we knew just up the street was robbed in the exact same way. Left his door unlocked for a moment to run to the store, came back and everything had been stolen. I'm not sure if they ever caught the guy. We noped out of that neighborhood pretty quick after. Lock your doors, people. A few years ago, I had a dog-sitting business with regular clients. One of those regular clients was a lady with a big, nice house. There was a really long driveway leading up to the house, and it was tucked far back from the residential roads. It was somehow isolated while being in a dark residential neighborhood. No one could drive to the house without being noticed. No one could park on the adjacent streets either, and it would be very unusual for anyone to be walking up to the house or through the yard without already having parked in the driveway. The last time my house/dog sat there, everything began as usual. I fed the dogs, gave them their various meds, and played with them for a while watching movies. It was basically the best job ever. Eventually, I got sleepy and went to bed in the master bedroom, as per orders. This room had a huge, beautiful window with a view of the driveway, the only normal access point to the home. I liked that about this room. After browsing on my phone in bed, I turned everything off and was trying to get some sleep. As I was lying there staring at the ceiling, deep in thought, I was suddenly snapped to total awareness. Nothing changed and no one came up the driveway either. Everything seemed to be completely silent and still. And yet suddenly I started to feel very uneasy. My hair started to stand up on the back of my neck, and a voice in my head was shouting urgently, "You're being watched. Someone is watching you." My heart rate began to pick up. I'd never experienced anything like this, and I can't really explain it in the least. I called my boyfriend immediately, grabbed my stuff, ran to my car, locked the doors, and sped out of the driveway. I glanced around the house as I was leaving, and still did not see anything. When I got home, I checked every door to make sure it was locked, and slept on the couch with a view of both entry points. The paranoia slowly dissipated, and eventually I was able to sleep just fine. The next day, I returned in the morning and took care of the dogs. Loves, meds, potty, breakfast. I started walking through the house towards the back, where the master bedroom is. Again, I started to feel really strange. It was not a feeling of being watched this time, but more of a high alert sense that things were off subtly. I began to notice that there were candy wrappers on the ground that weren't there the night before. Doors were open that I'd specifically closed to keep the dogs corralled. Things had been subtly moved around. I left again and called my boyfriend to stay with me. I could not be in this house alone. There had absolutely been someone in there the night prior. I wondered if maybe someone in the family stopped by. But every time previously, they'd always given me lots of warning before someone came over. It was not too uncommon for the owner's son to stop by, but he had my number, and he also gave me a heads up whenever he was coming. I called up the owner just to make sure and told her what I'd noticed. She told me she'd call around and see if anyone had stopped by. She called me back in under an hour and assured me that no one did. "Must be that old ghost," she said and gave a mischievous giggle. Wow, what a relief she was taking my safety concerns so seriously. I told her I was having my boyfriend come over just to be safe. Thankfully, she didn't mind. A few hours later, me and my boyfriend get back to the house. He checks the downstairs. Absolutely never was I to go upstairs. Everything was fine. We were hanging out for hours, playing with the dogs and watching movies. I left my boyfriend in the living room, walked past the front door, and went to the bathroom at around 10 p.m. I'm about to walk back out when suddenly the dogs start barking. As I'm walking back, I see my boyfriend standing in the entryway by the living room. He was focused on the front door and tense like I'd never seen him. Again, the hair stood up on the back of my neck. He ducked to the side of the front door window. Before I could even finish asking what was going on, he shushed me. "Someone's out there!" He approached the door and looked out, but whoever it was no longer in sight. I rushed over to him, and he explained that as he was sitting on the floor in the living room, the dogs started barking at the front door. When he went over to check, he saw a black figure peering in through the windows, then walked off. When I looked out, no one was there anymore. I'm absolutely terrified at this point, so I texted the son again to make sure it was not him. Short aside, a few weeks prior he'd asked me to go to a wedding with him, and I gently replied that my boyfriend didn't think it was appropriate. So when I asked him if he'd stop by the house, he replied, "My girlfriend doesn't think it's appropriate you're texting me so late." I apologized and told him I had a safety concern and it was quite important. I told him what my boyfriend saw. He responded that he did not stop by. At that point, we were done for the night. We put the dogs in their kennels, waited a bit, and ran to my car. The next day, I very quickly took care of the dogs in the morning and left before the owner got back. I never felt such a deep electric sense of imminent danger like I did that first night in bed. It was just too much. When the owner asked me back a few months later, even though I desperately needed the money, I declined right away. I had an encounter in December of last year that left me feeling very unsettled. I was in a vulnerable position as my partner and I were both female and homeless. We had just purchased an RV to live in, but were having trouble finding a spot to rent. It was an older model and we have pets as well. We parked in the farthest corner of the Walmart parking lot in Bend, Oregon, around 10 a.m. one day. My partner had some errands that needed to be run and took a bus to do them. I held down the fort and watched the dogs while they were away. It was going to be a long day of waiting around for her to get back so we could leave. I went into the store twice to make some purchases early in the day. I worked on some maintenance and art before getting bored enough to take a nap. As I was taking the dogs outside beforehand, 2 police officer vehicles pulled up and parked right next to the RV. At this point, I was preparing for them to ask me to move the vehicle or tell me I can't park overnight or something. After a while of nothing though, I fell asleep anyway. When I woke up, I could tell it was getting toward the evening. The sun was still very much up though, and considering the police presence, I wasn't particularly in the mindset of anything bad happening. Still, I always carry my pepper spray on me. My partner was not back yet, although I was expecting her to be back late. She had our only phone, so I went into the store to check the time. The officers had moved away by this point, and the parking area in general was pretty barren, save for one van parked in the spot right behind the RV. I entered the store and went to the restroom in the front. I walked over to the electronics department to see what time it was on the displays. It was a few minutes before 6 p.m. I left after only having been in there a few minutes. As I was walking out the door, the crowd in front of me slowly dispersed to veer toward their respective vehicles. I continued walking behind one man who seemingly parked in the same direction as me. He was tall, thin, and scraggly, with shoulder-length blonde hair and a black hoodie. I walked maybe 30 feet behind him the whole way. As he passed all the cars by the front of the store, I came to the conclusion that this man must be the owner of the vehicle behind the RV. He walked with clear direction, not looking around for where his car was or anything. After passing the main crowd of the parking lot, I got my pepper spray out of my pocket and held it in my hand, just as a routine safety measure. The man walked between the back of the RV and the driver's side door of the van. I figured he was about to get in. but instead he just kinda lingered there. I stopped walking that direction and headed toward a more populated parking area at the next store across the street. It was closer than Walmart from this end. He looked at me and we made eye contact for a while. It felt like he recognized me, as if he'd been staking me out and was surprised to see me leaving the store so soon. I continued to walk away while staring at him, and he watched me before slipping around the side of my RV, where there were some bushes and a fence with no outlet. I'm noping the fuck out at this point, so I went into another store and walked around, blankly staring at things for a bit, trying to formulate my next plan. It was pretty busy in there with no one at the customer service desk, so I went into the gas station next door and asked to use the phone. I called my partner to explain the situation and told her not to go directly to the RV when she got back. I then headed back into Walmart, got a coffee at the McDonald's inside, and waited there for an hour until she was able to return. Perhaps I should have called the police, as I was worried about my animals and my possessions being stolen, but I had recently called 911 while witnessing domestic violence a few days prior. They took 2 hours to show up even though it was in the middle of downtown, and when they did, they harassed me for being homeless anyway. I was worried they'd not only not help, but I might possibly get in trouble for even being there. I don't have a driver's license myself, so having to move the RV before my partner returned would be a dangerous situation. When she arrived, we went back to the RV together. The van was gone. Nothing was touched despite one of the windows not locking properly, but the pets were very spooked. Maybe they decided against doing anything after I'd caught them. I'm not that well off though, obviously, and honestly, one look at that beat-up old thing would tell you I don't have much worth taking. Honestly, just from the look in that guy's eyes, I feel like he wasn't there for my material possessions. Happily, I'll never have to find out for sure. I was 21 and recently became a police officer. I was also recently dumped, so my friend suggested Tinder. As a 21-year-old and new cop, I had that I'm invincible and can take on anyone mentality. I matched with a very good-looking, out-of-my-league woman. We chatted and eventually set up a date to meet. She said she had a great open field to look at stars and hang out, and we could meet up at her house. So the night came and I was excited. She seemed excited too when I picked her up. She guided me to the field and it looked very nice. Open space, woods, deer, and other wildlife. In the field, I noticed these really dim headlights in the distance. Then a van started driving towards us. They pulled up in front of us, almost close enough to block me from going forward. I told her to stay in the car, and I'd go say hi. I grabbed my flashlight and walked up. In the driver's side of the van, there was a decently sized man. I asked him what was going on, and if he could back up his car a little bit. He was very polite and said he was the owner of the property, and that he didn't mean to scare us. He told me he'd been having some trouble with poachers on his property, and wanted to make sure we weren't going to be shooting at anything. I assured him we'd only come out to look at some stars and wildlife. He was perfectly okay with that and told me to have a nice date, then drove away. After that, the girl was texting non-stop. Around an hour later, I saw headlights coming towards us again, this time at a really fast pace. We hopped in the car, and I moved it to a more defensive position. The same man came close enough to almost hit our vehicle. She hopped out of the car at that point and ran towards the guy. I immediately knew I was fucked. I got out and gave them commands to back up and get on the ground. Neither of them complied, obviously. The man proceeded to charge me and knock me to the ground. Luckily, I was able to get him on his back and get up. I saw my date grab a metal pipe from the van. She told me they had a gun and to give them my money and truck and I wouldn't get hurt. Of course, with my I'm invincible mentality, I told them no. She started to cry and said they didn't want to hurt me. He then started going back towards the car. At that point, I told them I was a police officer and drew my concealed firearm. I told them to get on the ground right now. After a moment of shock from them, they complied, and I was able to call 911. I told them my name and badge number, and that I had two at gunpoint and needed backup immediately. I gave our dispatcher the best directions I could to the field, but while on the phone, they both fled. Again, stupid new cop young guy mentality. I chased them. I took off after the man, who ran into the woods around the field. I chased him for maybe 30 seconds and heard 3 loud pops and saw muzzle flash. My invincible mentality went right out the window. I ran like hell back towards my car and peeled the hell out of there. I went back to the area I'd picked her up in, called dispatchers again, and had the officers come to that location. Of course, the first one to pull up was my sergeant and my field training officer. They were both completely understanding and totally didn't give me any shit at all. I think the most used words were dumbass and stupid fucking rookie. I hopped in their car and we went towards the field. Luckily, the van was still there. I was told to shut my mouth and only come out if they started getting shot at. They cleared the area and started looking in the van. They found meth right on the center console and searched the car. What scared me the most was when my field training officer and sergeant came back to the patrol car, let me out, and told me to come look in the back of the van. Both of them were pale and looked horrified. I went to the back of the van. There were several knives, duct tape, lighter fluid, a decent amount of rifle ammunition, handcuffs, and what looked like dried blood. In the front passenger side, we found an AR-15 style rifle and 2 more handguns. We called for immediate backup and detectives. When they investigated the blood, though, it turned out it was not blood at all. The plates had been stolen, and the van was a reported stolen vehicle as well. I still get shit about the whole encounter, but luckily no one got hurt. I'll never use online dating again though.